بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على منبعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم ألهمنا رشدنا وفقنا بما تحب وترضى. Peace and blessings of God be upon you, attendees. I pray everyone is having a fantastic day and that your Ramadan and fast and striving aren't being done in vain. Everything stems from an intention, and as a result, the intention is really much the differentiating factor. The intention is what makes someone unique. The intention is what makes someone sincere. So we ask the Almighty for sincere intention and prosperity in that matter. So today, brothers and sisters, as we embark on our passageway, last week we had spoke about the subject matter of a case study of how, for example, the prophetic approach to medicine is approached in the light of Islamic scholarship. We provided an example on that subject matter. Today, what we're going to do, God willing, is discuss another example with regard to that. Medicine, in the light of Islamic theology, isn't necessarily just for, when we think of it, physical recovery. As many of us know, Islam essentially describes itself as an essential remedy to the sicknesses of the heart, the sicknesses of the mind, and thereafter the sicknesses of the limbs and the materialism that surrounds us. And I think this point is extremely important. We tend to forget things when we start to discuss the subject matter of medicine in the light of the prophetic approach, that the foundation of medicine in Islam is a therapy for the heart and the mind. As a result, it guides on points that require guidance, and it advises on points that require advice, and it helps on points for which humankind needs help on. Today's time and world, what is the most serious sickness? I think that many of us will say it is the coronavirus. I argue that it's something deeper than the coronavirus. And that's the psychological sickness humankind is going through at this point. And when we say psychological sickness, we're talking about the constant wrestles that many people go through with stress, with anxiety, with depression, purposelessness, the psychological dilemmas a person is tumbling with. Some like to call it a sickness, others will say, no, it is a case. But one thing is certain, there are many people that are facing psychological difficulty. Okay. Sometimes that is due to the perimeters that face them, the surrounding environment. At others, it is due to the constant thought of an individual essentially embarking on a sail in the midst of the ocean, and they essentially do not have control of what direction they go, for the winds are controlling their sails, and they don't have knowledge as to how to control the sail itself. So Imam al-Nawawi has a statement with regard to this, and it's actually essentially attributed to Imam al-Nawawi, but it is an earlier poetry attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i about 400 years earlier, 300 years earlier. So Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, إن لله عباد فطنا طلقوا الدنيا وخافوا الفتنة نظروا فيها فلما علموا أنها ليس لحي وطنا جعلوها لجة واتخذوا صالح الأعمال فيها سفنا. So his argument is in this poetry that is reverberated, orated, said, and thought over, that among humankind are individuals that essentially have purified themselves intellectually. طلقوا الدنيا وخافوا الفتنة. They didn't allow the materialistic world to overpower them. So as a result, the world came into a being for which it follows. They are not a follower of materialism, but materialism follows them. وَخَافُوا الْفِتْنَةَ, and they feared and they were worried. And because of the things that surround them in life, they took the precursor to save themselves or to take the proper steps to keep themselves healthy, intellectually, and especially in this case, spiritually, upon a command of truth. نظروا فيها فلما علموا أنها ليس لحي وطنا. From among their characteristic is they look to this world that they are in. How do they get here? Where do they come from? Where will they be going? And in their ponder, in their reflection, they reach a conclusion. أنها ليس لحي وطنا. That in the end, every human being has a time to pass, and that essentially we don't have full residence over the lands for which we live on, but instead we're given lands, and the lands we are given is considered a temporary relief. So if it is a temporary relief, it is something of a temporary time frame, and there is an end to it. طلقوا الدنيا وخافوا الفتنة نظروا فيها فلما علموا أنها ليس لحي وطنا لا جعلوها لجة واتخذوا صالح الأعمال فيها سفنا. So these individuals that are essentially intellectuals, sincere individuals, having given a sincere ponder over life, search the path of truth, and realize that world is very much temporarily, that they came over control of the materialism and that materialism follows them, but they don't follow materialism. And the end result is they conclude and finalize that essentially, really, there is a purpose to life. We came through a purpose, and with that purpose comes a physical end. جعلوها لجة واتخذوا صالح الأعمال فيها سفنا. And that physical end essentially is an embarked passage to the next realm for which accountability comes to play. So what they choose and what they have concluded and how they approach life is essentially creating, designing, making a boat that is able to surface in a time of extreme weather in the midst of the ocean, the oceanic waves, the pressures, the wind. جعلوها لجة واتخذوا صالح الأعمال فيها سفنا. And as such, their good deeds become a beacon of refuge and protection. Their thought process, their choices they make become a refuge of protection, a safe haven from dwindling into the oceanic sphere, here analogically, and drowning in the midst of the ocean, whereas they have a boat to exist and survive the onslaught that is around them. So Islamic theology and sciences, it does teach that life, there are times of happiness and there are times of sadness. And this is something every one of us can relate to directly. In that thought process, who are we? Who am I? Who are you? How did you get here? Where are you going? What will become of you? These are three catechisms that are discussed early on in Islamic theology, including Western Christendom as well, and the Calvin approach to philosophical thought. So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a letter on the subject matter of these three questions. How did you get here? What are you doing? Where are you going? Catechisms. And that's a question that everyone needs to give an opportunity to stop and think of and try to live by. Because as such, life is quite sad at times. It is quite difficult at times. But the interesting thing is if you've created, metaphorically, a boat that can survive, so too will you survive. So too will you be in peace. So too will you be in safety and prevented and protected from drowning in the midst of the ocean. So Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, rahimahullah ta'ala, very unique scholar, the 4th century in the Hijri calendar, he is discussing something, and he talks about how old humankind is. If we talk about these three questions, right? These three catechisms. Who are you? That is, where did you come from? Who are you? What are you doing? Where will you be going? In that subject matter, as we think of how did you get here? Right? How did you get here? What are you doing? Where are you going? On the subject of how did you get here, undoubtedly there's a thought process that leads us to extending out to the supernatural, but at the same time to the ancestry of humankind. And through speculations, through narratives that are out there, there are some traditions that had argued based upon scriptural references, I mean religious traditions, that had argued that based upon scriptural references, that humankind is of a particular age. Like 6,000 years old is humankind, and others says it's 5,000 years old, for example, when you're thinking about where you came from. Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says all of that essentially is not correct. What we need to do is look to the Quranic text and the prophetic tradition that's established, and let us think of the subject matter at hand. So you look to the Quran, it doesn't say how old humankind is. It doesn't say. And you look to the prophetic tradition, and when we say the prophetic tradition, let us be clear here, we're talking about what is authentically established from the teachings and practice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, directly from his lips, his speech. And you don't find a particular age of humankind. The Quran addresses humankind. It addresses its creation. It addresses evolution. It addresses its circumstance. It addresses peoples of the past, among other things, but it doesn't say age. Similarly, in the prophetic tradition, it addresses humankind. There is wisdom, there's cultural practice, there's guidance, there's speaking of people of the past, speaking of history, political circumstances, etc. But it doesn't say how old humankind is. So these speculations from outside traditions, religious traditions that argued 5,000 or 6,000 or 10,000 based upon scriptural understanding, and the foundational element in accordance to the argument of authenticity, Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi says there's nothing specific in the Quran or Sunnah. So when we think of where we came from in that discussion, there is going to be a circular rector that guides us to think of humankind. What is your ancestry like? Where are you coming from? Who was your great-grandfather and that great-great-great-grandfather, that great-grandfather? It is true that there is an argument that humankind is related. Okay, and Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, one of the earliest compilers of the Quranic exegesis tafsir, he says that regardless as to how far out an individual is to another in lineage or race, etc., they're brothers, they're sisters, they're family, because their ancestry go back to a Unitarian approach of a human form, and that essentially everything goes back to being related. Okay. With that in mind, it builds off something. Ibn Jarir, he says, what you come to conclude from that, it does, is that humankind has a responsibility to one another. So imagine this is a 1,000-year-old scholar, 1,200-year-old scholar or so, writing about how to interact with society. And he says, regardless of lineage, disposition, etc., there is a humanistic right between humankind and how they deal with one another. And that humanistic right should be influenced tremendously and respected even more when you come to realize that everyone essentially is related in some way. And as such, a person, the prophetic tradition teaches, one is not truly a faithful individual in Islamic monotheism if their neighbor are not secure from their evils, if their neighbor fear them due to the evils they possess and they act upon. So Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi rahimahullah ta'ala is talking about such things, and he says that there isn't a reference that talk about the specific age of humankind. Okay. But the references that do address that, they give a very unique, large, far number. And he says that the Almighty, he says in the Quran, لخلق السماوات والأرض أكبر من خلق الناس ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون أأنتم أشد خلقا أم السماء بناها. The creation of the universe, أكبر من خلق الناس, it is superior, more intertwined than the creation of humankind. ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. But humankind, they don't, most people, they don't realize this thing. And it makes us wonder into our second question. What are we doing? Where did we come from? And what are we doing here? You stop and you think, and how large the world is. And sometimes we think the world revolves around us. But Islamic teachings is trying to remove us from that centralized thought. It is trying to remove us from the centralized thought, which is egocentrism, into the egocentric individual, into a spiritual growth of happiness and piety and a heart removed of jealousy, removed of these things, into turning towards the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is true that it's important to seek what benefits you, and that's what the Prophet Muhammad he said. Seek that which benefits you, but while doing so, put your trust in the Almighty and work towards that goal. It is true. But egocentrism is completely different than working to bring about a benefit for yourself. And unfortunately, through that, sometimes it reaches the mind and people assume, like, as we know, Pharaoh became to say, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, I am the ever great Lord of the universe. So Ibn Hazm in his description and illustration discussion on this matter goes on to say that the Prophet Muhammad he also said that our generation of humankind, the Ummah, is one hair upon, and he's doing this as an analogy for us to stop and think about, upon a hair of hairs on a boar or a sheep or a large animal that is extremely hairy. So he's saying, Prophet Muhammad is saying that then, in his time, we look back 1,400 years ago, the Prophet is saying, our generation, my ummah, is just a speck, a hair. Okay, it is a hair. Upon the hairs, and he provides an analogy metaphorically for us to think of, the hairs of the animal kingdom you see on sheep or goats, etc. So populations and communities that existed in the ages and the uniqueness of time. Which brings us to our third point. Where are you going? Right? What are you doing? Where are you going? What will become of you? What will become of you? The Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi says that the Prophet Muhammad he said to the people, I was revealed in a time frame as an ambassador and warner and rectifier to a population of humankind in which my advent and this population, those that follow me thereafter of my community, are like this to the day of judgment. Right? And he put his fingers together. That is the meeting with the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala, putting them together. That is the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Attached to the finger is a representation of how close he's saying it is to what? End of times. End of times, that's the field of eschatology. Eschatology is shared by the Abrahamic traditions. Okay? And he says like this, they are like this. It's true that in one interpretation, it is, what does it mean by this? Is it the finger up to the middle finger? That is, that space is what remains. That's an observation. But a large population will argue that the meant is the nearness. But he didn't give a specific time. There are signs that address this matter. What are you doing? Where are you going? What will become of you? Day of Judgment is something. We are living in a time and circumstance. It is true that everyone faces this thing known as Yawm al-Qiyamah. But that which we study in eschatology, signs, major signs, smaller signs, etc., not every human being will face all of these signs. But for them, they pass away. In their time, in their existence, they see many things that are around them, but they pass away. And when they pass away, Islamic theology argues, you now have an opener to this realm of the unseen, and that which is talked about and promised comes to exist in time. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he guided us into a very important subject. I love this prophetic tradition extremely. I feel that it is something that should be taught to all of our family members, our community members, whoever they may be. And he says, alayhi that if the hour were to commence and you are existent in that time, and you have a plant, say a spring, a sprout of a plant to bury, that is to bury, to harvest, to place into the earth so it can grow, even if you know the judgment matter is at hand, this something known as the judgment is at hand, and you have the chance to do so, bury it, plant it, and hope from that planting, from the meaning, the benefit that's behind it of righteousness. So you continuously push forward. You continuously push forward, regardless of the circumstance. If you're sick, you stay positive, you push forward. If you're living and it so happens that, hey, this eschatological statement as something known as Judgment Day is at hand, and you have that plant in your hand and you can do it, go ahead and plant it and look for the future and push forward because of the good deeds that are always there and the hope that is always there. This is what Islamic theology teaches. And this should be our thought, especially in these times. We're now finishing up with Ramadan. There are external stressors that are out there with the job, with the psychological effects of the sickness that is very much profound. It can be at home, domestic violence, and these things. God protect us and forgive us. But whatever the circumstance, keep pushing forward. Remind yourself that the Almighty is greater than the difficulty that you face, that the Almighty is cure is far greater and able than the sickness you face, and that the Almighty's hand is there for those that turn towards Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Almighty knows best. Enjoy your evening, everybody. Until we meet again, God willing. Assalamu alaikum, and peace and blessings of God be upon you.